I found out my neighbor entered my house repeatedly while I was at work, so I came home early and surprised everyone by handing them over to a fully armed FBI tactical strike team. I am Clara. I am 34 years old, and for the past 8 years, I genuinely believed I had built a solid, impenetrable life. I am a registered nurse at the local Presbyterian hospital, a job that drains every ounce of my physical and emotional energy, but fills me with a profound sense of purpose. My husband, Harrison, is a certified public accountant. He works from home, managing client portfolios and crunching numbers in his basement office. We live in a beautiful, historic colonial house in a quiet, affluent neighborhood. It is the kind of house with pristine landscaping and a wraparound porch, the exact kind of home I used to dream about when I was a little girl growing up with absolutely nothing. I bought this house 5 years ago, entirely in cash, using the inheritance my grandmother left me. Grandma was a force of nature. She built a highly successful real estate business from the ground up in an era when women were barely allowed to have their own bank accounts. She worked her fingers to the bone, saved every penny, and left it all to me because she knew I had her exact same practical, relentless spirit. Harrison and I agreed early on that my inheritance would be our safety net, the foundation of our future. We lived off his accounting income and my nursing salary. It felt perfectly balanced. It felt safe. I trusted him completely with our daily finances because that was his profession. I thought we were a team. But all of that shattered on a random Tuesday morning in December. The hospital was experiencing a massive network system glitch. We could not access patient records, and since the morning shift was overstaffed anyway, my supervisor sent a few of us home early. I was thrilled. I usually work 12-hour shifts, leaving the house at 5 in the morning and not returning until long after the sun has started to set. Pulling into my own driveway at noon felt like a stolen luxury. I imagined surprising Harrison, maybe making us some lunch, and just enjoying a quiet afternoon together. I unlocked the front door as quietly as possible, slipping off my shoes in the foyer. The house was completely silent. It was a heavy, charged kind of silence, like the atmosphere right before a violent thunderstorm breaks. I walked into the kitchen to drop my purse on the granite counter, and that is when my entire reality tilted off its axis. Sitting right next to the coffee maker was a ceramic mug. It was light blue, delicate, and covered in a pattern of tiny, hand-painted pink roses. It was not my mug. I stood there staring at it for a full 2 minutes. In the hospital emergency room, I am trained to catalog details instantly. My brain went into immediate triage mode. I registered the pale blue color. I registered the fragile handle. But most importantly, I registered the bright pink lipstick stain smeared clearly across the rim. It was a vibrant, youthful shade of pink. I do not wear pink lipstick. I wear a subtle matte nude if I wear any makeup at all. I stepped closer, not touching it, just analyzing it. There was a faint trail of steam rising from the dark liquid inside. It was fresh. The air in my kitchen smelled subtly different, too. Underneath the familiar scent of our roasted coffee beans, there was a lingering trace of floral perfume. It was sweet, expensive, and completely foreign to my house. I wear a warm vanilla scent, and only on special occasions. A cold, heavy knot formed at the bottom of my stomach. My nurse's intuition, the gut feeling that tells me when a patient is secretly hemorrhaging internally even when their monitors look perfectly fine, started screaming at me. Someone had been in my house. A woman. A woman who drank out of delicate floral mugs, wore bright pink lipstick, and felt comfortable enough to leave her dishes on my kitchen counter in the middle of a Tuesday morning. And my husband was supposedly downstairs, working alone. I did not scream. I did not throw the blue mug against the wall. That is not how my mind works. When faced with a crisis, I do not panic, I assess. I left the mug exactly where it was, picked up my purse, and walked to the door of the basement. I took a deep breath, smoothing my expression into one of mild, pleasant surprise, and walked down the carpeted stairs. Harrison was sitting exactly where he always sat. His large wooden desk was covered in neatly stacked manila folders, and his dual monitors were glowing with complicated spreadsheets. He was wearing his usual comfortable gray sweater, looking like the picture of reliable domesticity. He looked up as I reached the bottom step, his eyebrows raising in what looked like genuine shock. "Clara? What are you doing home so early?" he asked, pushing his chair back and standing up to greet me. "Massive system crash at the hospital," I said, keeping my voice light, breezy, and perfectly normal. "They could not pull up any charts, so they sent the extra staff home. Lucky me, I get a half day." He walked over and kissed my cheek. The same familiar, warm peck he had given me thousands of times over the past 8 years. "That is great, honey. You have been working so hard lately. You deserve a break." He seemed so relaxed, so entirely normal. But as I looked at him, I realized he was a little too relaxed. When you startle someone who is deep in focused work, they usually blink, shake off the concentration, and take a second to adjust. Harrison did not miss a single beat. It was as if he had anticipated the interaction and had his lines ready. "I was going to make some lunch," I said, watching his eyes carefully. "By the way, whose mug is that up in the kitchen?" The question slipped out, casual and entirely unthreatening. I watched his face with the intensity of a hawk watching a mouse. Harrison paused. It was a fraction of a second, barely perceptible to anyone who had not spent nearly a decade studying his every mood. But I caught it. A tiny flicker of calculation behind his dark eyes. "What mug?" he asked, his tone perfectly flat. "The light blue one with the pink roses." "By the coffee maker," I replied, leaning casually against the doorframe. He let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Oh, that old thing. I dug it out of the back of the corner cabinet. You know how we accumulate random dishes and promotional cups over the years. I just grabbed the first clean thing I could find." My blood turned to absolute ice. I knew every single piece of china, ceramic, and glass in that house. I had personally registered for our dinnerware before our wedding 8 years ago. I was the one who unpacked the boxes when we moved in. I was the one who cleaned those cabinets every single spring. That blue mug with the pink roses had never, in the entire history of our marriage, been inside my home before today. "Right," I said slowly, forcing a warm smile onto my face. "I must have forgotten about it. Want a sandwich?" "Love one," he smiled back, sitting down and returning his attention to his spreadsheets. I walked back up the stairs on legs that felt like lead. I had just diagnosed the sickness in my home. My husband was a liar. He had looked me right in the eyes and delivered a flawless, rehearsed falsehood without a single drop of sweat or a tremor in his voice. The realization was more terrifying than the lipstick stain itself. If he could lie to my face that smoothly about a ceramic cup, what else had he been lying about for the last 8 years? I spent the rest of the afternoon going through the motions of a normal day. I made turkey sandwiches. I did a load of laundry. I nodded and smiled as Harrison complained about a difficult client audit he was supposedly working on. But internally, my mind was racing through every single interaction we had shared over the last few months. The late nights working in the basement. The times he encouraged me to take extra shifts at the hospital to further my career. The pieces were scattering around me, and I needed to figure out how they fit together. I needed a suspect. And I had a very strong feeling I knew exactly where to look. That evening, after dinner, I decided to make my first strategic move. I needed to test a theory. I told Harrison I was going to bake some cookies for the nurse's station tomorrow, but realized I was out of granulated sugar. I put on my coat and walked across our manicured lawn to the house next door. Our neighbors had moved in about 6 months ago. Their names were Valerie and Donovan. Donovan was a senior commercial pilot who flew long-haul international routes, meaning he was out of the country for weeks at a time. Valerie was a former marketing executive who had quit her job when they moved, embracing the life of a wealthy stay-at-home wife. We had exchanged polite waves over the fence and briefly chatted when the mail got mixed up, but we were not close. I rang her doorbell. A few moments later, the door swung open. "Clara." "What a lovely surprise," Valerie said, her face lighting up with a wide, welcoming smile. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. She was beautiful, a few years younger than me, with perfectly styled blonde hair and immaculate clothes. And right there, painted on her smiling lips, was the exact same shade of bright, vibrant pink lipstick I had seen smeared on the blue ceramic mug in my kitchen. "Hi, Valerie. I am so sorry to bother you this late," I said, matching her friendly energy. "I am in the middle of baking cookies for the hospital, and I just ran out of sugar. Do you happen to have a cup I could borrow?" "Of course. Come on in, get out of the cold," she ushered me inside. Her house had the exact same floor plan as mine, but the interior decoration could not have been more different. While I favored clean lines, dark woods, and practical modern furniture, Valerie's home looked like a catalog for delicate, feminine aesthetics. Everything was decorated in soft pastel colors, lots of floral patterns, and fragile glass decor. It was the exact environment where a pale blue mug with tiny pink roses would belong perfectly. I followed her into the kitchen. As she opened her pantry to look for the sugar, I casually leaned against her island counter. "So, is Donovan back in town yet?" I asked politely. Valerie let out an exaggerated sigh, shaking her head. "No, he is stuck in Frankfurt until Sunday. The weather delayed his return flight. Honestly, Clara, it gets so incredibly lonely in this big house all by myself." She handed me a crystal measuring cup full of sugar. Our hands brushed. Her skin was incredibly soft, her nails professionally manicured with a clear gloss. They were the hands of a woman who never had to scrub bodily fluids off a linoleum floor or lift a 200-pound patient out of a bed. "I can imagine," I said sympathetically. "It must be tough having him gone so much." Valerie leaned in slightly, lowering her voice as if we were sharing a deep secret. "It is. Sometimes I look at you and Harrison and I just get so jealous. You are so incredibly lucky, Clara. Having a husband who works from home, who is always just right there, waiting for you. I wonder what it would be like to have a man who is actually present." The comment was delivered with a sweet smile, but it felt incredibly heavy. It was a loaded statement. It felt like she was testing the waters, or perhaps silently gloating. I watched her eyes. There was a glimmer of something there, a spark of excitement, a thrill of a secret game she thought she was winning. "Yes," I replied, keeping my voice completely steady. "Harrison is definitely very present. I always know exactly where he is." I thanked her for the sugar and walked back across the dark lawn to my house. The cold night air stung my cheeks, but I did not feel it. My theory was confirmed. The lipstick matched. The aesthetic matched. The schedule matched. Valerie was the woman in my house. My husband was sleeping with the lonely wife next door while I was breaking my back at the hospital to provide for our future. Most people would have stormed into the basement right then, screamed at their husband, and demanded a divorce. But I am not most people. I am my grandmother's granddaughter. I do not throw tantrums, I gather evidence. I needed absolute, undeniable proof. The next morning was Wednesday. My alarm went off at 4:30 in the morning, buzzing loudly in the pitch-black bedroom. I rolled over, turned it off, and sat on the edge of the bed. Harrison groaned, shifting under the heavy duvet. "Morning," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. "Morning," I replied, standing up and stretching. I kept my back to him so he could not see my face in the dim light of the bedside lamp. "I have some bad news. The hospital is incredibly short-staffed today because of a flu outbreak among the nurses. They asked me to pull a double shift. I will not be home until at least 9 o'clock tonight." I turned around to grab my scrubs from the chair. I watched him closely in the mirror. Harrison sat up, rubbing his eyes, and put on his best mask of sympathetic concern. "A double shift? Clara, that is brutal. You are going to burn yourself out working 14 hours straight." "I know," I sighed, playing the part of the dedicated, exhausted healthcare worker flawlessly. "But they really need me. And the overtime pay will be good for our savings account." "Well, you just focus on saving lives. I will hold down the fort here. I have a massive stack of client accounts to audit anyway, so I will probably be buried in the basement until you get home," he said, lying back down against the pillows. "Okay. See you tonight." "Love you," I said. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. "Love you too, honey," he replied. I grabbed my bag, walked out to my car, and drove away. But I did not drive to the hospital. I drove exactly 4 blocks away, parked my car in the back corner of a busy grocery store parking lot, and pulled my hood up over my head. The winter air was biting cold as I walked the 4 blocks back to my neighborhood. I stayed entirely on the sidewalks behind the tall hedges, making sure no one driving by could spot me. I reached my house from the rear alleyway. We have a small side door near the laundry room that we almost never use. I unlocked it quietly with my spare key, slipped inside, and locked the deadbolt behind me. The house was dark and quiet. I crept up the back staircase, avoiding the third step that always creaked, and slipped into the master bedroom. Our bedroom has a large walk-in closet with louvered doors that provide a perfect, hidden view of the hallway and the stairs leading to the guest room. I sat down on the floor of the closet, tucked myself behind a row of my winter coats, and waited. The psychological torture of sitting in the dark of your own home, waiting to catch your spouse betraying you, is impossible to describe. Every minute felt like an hour. The silence in the house was deafening. My mind kept trying to bargain with reality. I hoped, irrationally, that I was wrong. I hoped Harrison would just stay in the basement all day. I hoped Valerie would stay next door. I hoped the blue mug was just a bizarre coincidence. But as the clock on my phone ticked past 10 o'clock, the rational part of my brain knew exactly what was going to happen. I had established the timeline. Donovan was out of town. I was supposedly working until 9 at night. The house was empty. The stage was set. At exactly 10:47 in the morning, the heavy wooden front door downstairs clicked. It did not open to the sound of a doorbell. It opened to the sound of a metal key turning smoothly in the lock. My breath caught in my throat. I pressed my hand hard against my own mouth to ensure I did not make a single sound. My husband had not just invited the neighbor in, he had given her a key to my home. A key to the sanctuary I had purchased with my grandmother's hard-earned money. The disrespect of it hit me like a physical punch to the chest. Footsteps echoed on the hardwood floor downstairs. Light, confident, clicking footsteps. She was walking through my kitchen, opening cabinets, moving with the absolute familiarity of someone who essentially lived there part-time. A moment later, I heard the heavy thud of Harrison's footsteps coming up from the basement stairs. "You are early," I heard Harrison's voice float up from the kitchen. It was not his professional accountant voice, and it was not his sweet husband voice. It was a low, intimate, hungry voice I had not heard directed at me in years. "I missed you," Valerie's voice replied, followed by the unmistakable sound of a long, deep kiss. I squeezed my eyes shut in the dark closet, my fingernails digging so hard into my palms that they broke the skin. I sat frozen in the shadows, trapped in a nightmare from which I could not wake up. "Let us go upstairs," Harrison murmured. "What about Clara? Are you sure her shift does not end at 3 o'clock today?" Valerie asked. Her tone was casually dismissive, like she was asking about the weather, not about the woman whose life she was actively dismantling. "She texted me this morning. She got roped into a double shift because of the flu going around. She is trapped at the hospital until 9 tonight." "We have the whole day," Harrison replied confidently. Their footsteps moved toward the main staircase. I shrank further back into the coats, terrified that the erratic, violent pounding of my heart would give me away. I watched through the wooden slats of the closet door as they reached the top of the stairs. They were holding hands. Valerie was wearing a silk robe that I instantly recognized. It was my silk robe, the one I kept hanging on the back of the bathroom door. She was wearing my clothes inside my house. They did not turn toward the master bedroom. Harrison, at the very least, possessed the microscopic amount of decency required to not defile our marital bed. Instead, they walked straight down the hall and entered the guest bedroom. The door clicked shut behind them. What followed was the most agonizing 45 minutes of my entire existence. I am a medical professional. I am trained to compartmentalize trauma. I have held the hands of mothers as their children flatlined. I have stood in pools of blood and remained completely calm while directing a trauma team. But nothing in my training prepared me for the sound of my husband making love to another woman one wall away from where I was hiding. I heard the creaking of the guest bed frame. I heard Valerie's breathless laughter. I heard Harrison saying things to her that he used to say to me when we were young and newly in love. Every sound was a hammer striking the glass of my reality, shattering 8 years of memories, inside jokes, shared meals, and future plans. Tears streamed silently down my face, hot and fast. I did not wipe them away. I just sat there, rocking slightly back and forth, biting down on the thick fabric of my own sweater to muffle any noise that might escape my throat. I felt physically sick, a wave of intense nausea washing over me. I wanted to burst out of that closet, kick the door down, and scream until my vocal cords tore. I wanted to grab her by her perfect blonde hair and drag her out of my house. But I did not move. The logical, clinical part of my brain took over, building an emotional dam to hold back the flood of grief. If I confronted them now, what would happen? They would be shocked, yes. There would be crying and screaming. Harrison would beg for forgiveness. He would claim it was a one-time mistake. He would manipulate the situation, gaslight me, and turn it into a messy, typical domestic dispute. No. I needed to know the depth of the infection before I could cut it out. I needed to know exactly how long this had been happening and what their ultimate goal was. So, I endured the torture. I sat in the dark, bleeding invisibly, and waited for them to finish. Eventually, the terrible sound stopped. The house grew quiet again, save for the low murmur of their voices through the wall. I slowly shifted my stiff legs, creeping out from behind the coats, and pressed my ear directly against the cold drywall separating my closet from the guest room. I needed to hear every single word. I expected to hear sweet nothings, romantic promises, or guilty apologies. Instead, what I heard completely changed the trajectory of my life. It transformed me from a heartbroken wife into a cold, calculating executioner. I pressed my ear so hard against the drywall it physically hurt, straining to catch the low dialogue between the two people resting in my guest bed. "I absolutely hate that we have to keep sneaking around like this," Valerie complained, her voice carrying a petulant, whining edge. "Donovan is starting to ask questions about why I am never answering my phone during the day. We cannot keep doing this forever, Harrison." "I know, baby, I know. It will not be much longer, I promise," Harrison replied, his voice soothing and manipulative. "Everything is almost perfectly lined up. We just need to stick to the plan for a few more months." "Are you absolutely certain about the money?" Valerie asked, her tone shifting from romantic to sharply practical. "You said she inherited a massive amount from her grandmother. North Carolina is an equitable distribution state. If she fights you in the divorce, it could get incredibly messy. She could tie you up in court for years." My breath completely stopped. Divorce? They were not just having a sordid neighborhood fling. They were actively planning the dissolution of my marriage. "Let me worry about Clara," Harrison scoffed, and the utter contempt in his voice made me shiver. "She is so exhausted from playing the hero at the hospital every day that she is completely blind to what happens right in front of her. She has zero financial literacy. She trusts me implicitly. I have already started moving our joint assets around to make it look like we have significantly less liquidity than we actually do." "But what about the inheritance?" Valerie pressed. "I have a strategy," Harrison explained smoothly. "When the time comes, I am going to file for divorce first. I am going to build a narrative that she has been emotionally abusive, entirely absent from the marriage, and neglecting her duties. I have been documenting her long hours and keeping a journal of arguments that never really happened. It will make her look incredibly unstable. Under the pressure, she will settle quickly just to keep things out of a public courtroom. I will force the sale of this house, take half the equity, and secure a massive chunk of that inheritance money. Then we finalize the purchase of the property in Colorado, and we are gone. We start completely over, just the two of us." I pulled my ear away from the wall and stared into the dark space of my closet. They were not just trying to break my heart. They were planning to completely destroy my life. Harrison intended to assassinate my character, label me as an abusive wife, steal the money my grandmother had bled to save, force me out of the home I bought, and use my own funds to buy a romantic getaway in Colorado with his mistress. The audacity of his cruelty was breathtaking. He thought I was weak. He thought my dedication to my patients made me stupid. He looked at my trust and saw only a vulnerability to be exploited. "She seems so sweet, though," Valerie said, though there was zero genuine sympathy in her voice. "I almost feel bad for her sometimes. She works so hard." "Do not waste your pity," Harrison laughed coldly. "Clara is pathetic. She thinks the world operates on fairness and hard work. She is exactly the kind of sheep that gets eaten by wolves." Pathetic. Sheep. Right then and there, sitting on the dusty floorboards of my closet, the Clara who had loved Harrison died completely. The grief evaporated, replaced by a cold, diamond-hard clarity. My medical training kicked in, but this time, I was not looking to heal. I was looking to amputate. Harrison thought he was the wolf in this scenario. He thought he was the master strategist playing a grand game of financial chess against a clueless opponent. But he had made one fatal miscalculation. He had forgotten that I deal with life and death every single day. I know how to remain calm under extreme pressure. I know how to diagnose a fatal flaw. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was going to tear his entire world apart. I waited in that closet for another 3 hours until Valerie finally left and Harrison went back down to his basement. When the coast was clear, I slipped out the back door, walked the 4 freezing blocks back to my car, and drove to a large electronics store. I was done crying. It was time to go to war. If you are enjoying this story of absolute betrayal and calculated revenge, please take a second to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below telling us which city you are watching from. Every single comment helps the video reach more viewers who love a great karma story. Thank you so much. I drove directly to a massive electronics retailer on the other side of the city. I paid in cash, making sure the transaction would never appear on our joint credit card statements. I bought 6 high-definition, motion-activated micro cameras. They were incredibly small, designed to look like phone chargers, smoke detectors, and generic black boxes that could easily blend into the shadows of a bookshelf. I also purchased a massive amount of cloud storage, setting it up under a brand new email address with a complex password that Harrison could never guess. I returned to the hospital and finished out my fake double shift by sitting in my car in the parking garage, staring blankly at the concrete wall. I needed those hours to prepare myself mentally. When I finally walked through my front door at 9:30 that night, I looked appropriately exhausted. Harrison was waiting for me in the kitchen. He had ordered takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant and even poured me a glass of expensive red wine. He walked over, wrapping his arms around my waist and burying his face in my neck. "You look completely drained, honey," he murmured, kissing my cheek. "Come sit down. I plated the food for you." Standing in his embrace was one of the most difficult things I have ever done. My skin crawled. I felt like I was being hugged by a large, venomous snake. Every instinct screamed at me to push him away, to hit him, to demand answers. But my medical training held me steady. I treated the situation the exact same way I treat a patient who has just been brought into the emergency room with a terminal diagnosis. You do not panic. You remain calm. You provide comfort, and you carefully prepare the surgical tools. I forced myself to lean into him, letting out a heavy, convincing sigh of relief. "It was a nightmare today," I lied, looking him directly in his eyes. "We lost 2 patients. I am just so glad to be home with you." The lie rolled off my tongue with terrifying ease. He smiled, a warm, seemingly genuine expression of love, and rubbed my shoulders. That night, after he fell into a deep sleep, snoring softly beside me, I slipped out of bed. Moving like a ghost through my own house, I spent the next 3 hours installing the hidden cameras. I placed one in the living room tucked behind the television, one in the kitchen disguised as a smart plug, and one perfectly angled inside the air vent of the guest bedroom. I was no longer just a wife living in a home. I was a warden overseeing a prison. For the next few days, I played my part flawlessly. I went to work, I complained about my demanding boss, I cooked dinner, and I kissed my husband goodnight. But every single day, during my lunch break at the hospital, I would lock myself in a bathroom stall, put in my wireless earbuds, and review the motion-activated footage on my phone. I watched them. I watched Valerie let herself in with the key. I watched them drink coffee in my kitchen, using my dishes. I watched them laugh, touch, and eventually disappear into the guest room. It was agonizing, watching my marriage dissolve in high-definition video. But I needed the evidence. I needed ironclad proof of their timeline and their intentions. And then, on Friday afternoon, the cameras captured something that completely changed the nature of the game. I was sitting in the hospital cafeteria, picking at a dry salad, when a notification popped up on my phone indicating motion in the living room. It was 1:30 in the afternoon. I opened the live feed. Harrison and Valerie were sitting on our leather sofa. They were fully clothed, but the atmosphere between them was incredibly tense. Valerie was pacing back and forth, wringing her manicured hands, looking completely distressed. "I cannot keep doing this, Harrison," Valerie was saying, her voice tight with anxiety. "You promised me you would have all the bank statements consolidated by the end of the week. Donovan called me from Germany this morning. He asked why there was a strange charge on our credit card from a private investigation firm. He is getting suspicious about my activities." Private investigation firm? I stopped chewing my food. I leaned closer to the small screen of my phone, turning the volume all the way up. Harrison ran a hand through his hair, looking agitated. "I told you, the money is tied up in a series of offshore holding accounts. I cannot just print out a simple bank statement without triggering a massive audit alert from the federal tax agencies. You have to give me more time to clean up the paper trail." "I do not have more time," Valerie practically shouted, dropping onto the sofa next to him. "Mitchell Lynn is threatening to sue me for breach of contract. He paid me a $10,000 retainer to find out where you hid his money. I was supposed to get close to you, mirror your schedule, figure out your passwords, and report back to him. I was supposed to be a spy, Harrison. Not your girlfriend." The cafeteria around me seemed to fade into absolute silence. My mind struggled to process the sheer weight of the information I was hearing. "Mitchell Lynn is a fool," Harrison sneered, his voice dripping with arrogance. "He thinks he can use a bored housewife to outsmart a certified public accountant? I knew what you were doing the second week you started bringing me cookies. You are terrible at hiding your true motives, Valerie." Valerie started to cry, genuine tears ruining her perfect makeup. "Then why did you let it happen? Why did you sleep with me if you knew I was hired to ruin you?" Harrison reached out, pulling her into his chest. "Because you are beautiful. Because my wife is a cold, exhausted robot who barely looks at me anymore. And because somewhere along the line, I actually fell in love with you. I am offering you a way out, Valerie. Stick with my plan. We take Clara for everything she has, we combine it with Mitchell's money, and we disappear to Colorado. Mitchell will never find us. Donovan will never find us. It will just be you and me." Valerie sobbed into his shoulder, slowly nodding her head. Okay, but you have to hurry. Mitchell is demanding a progress report by next Wednesday." I locked my phone and slid it into my pocket. My hands were shaking so violently I had to grip the edge of the cafeteria table to steady myself. The situation was infinitely worse and infinitely more complicated than a simple suburban affair. Valerie was not just a bored, lonely housewife looking for excitement. She was a paid mercenary. Someone named Mitchell Lynn had hired her to investigate my husband. And my husband, the man who handled all of our finances, had apparently stolen a massive amount of money from this Mitchell person. Harrison was not just a cheating spouse. He was an active corporate criminal. He was hiding stolen funds, and he planned to use my grandmother's inheritance to fund his great escape. I knew that recording their conversation was not enough. To truly stop Harrison, to protect my assets and put him behind bars, I needed the actual financial documents. I needed the digital paper trail that proved his crimes. And all of that information was locked inside his heavy, encrypted laptop in the basement office. Harrison was incredibly protective of that computer. He never left it unattended, and he never left it powered on when he left the room. He thought I was terrible with technology. He frequently joked about how I could barely operate the television remote. I let him believe that. It was the perfect cover. For the next 3 nights, I barely slept. I pretended to read a book in bed, waiting for him to come upstairs. I had placed a tiny, pinhole camera directly above his basement desk, angled perfectly to capture his keyboard. Every night, I would review the footage, slowing it down frame by frame, watching the exact movement of his fingers as he typed in his master password. It took me 3 days to confirm the exact sequence of letters, numbers, and symbols. It was a complex password, a mix of his mother's maiden name, a specific year, and 3 special characters. On Monday night, at 2 o'clock in the morning, listening to the deep, rhythmic sounds of his snoring, I crept down into the dark basement. I sat in his leather office chair, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I opened the laptop. The screen flared to life, casting a cold, blue glow across my face. I carefully typed in the sequence I had memorized. The computer unlocked. I immediately inserted a high-capacity, encrypted flash drive I had purchased into the side port. I began digging through his files. Harrison was arrogant, but he was also a meticulous accountant. He documented everything. He just hid it very well. I bypassed his standard client folders and found a hidden directory nested deep within system files, disguised under the name of an outdated software program. When I opened that folder, the entire scope of his criminal enterprise laid itself bare across the screen. Harrison's accounting firm had not just been struggling, it had been forcibly dissolved by a court order 3 months ago. He had been partners with a man named Mitchell Lynn. Over the course of 18 months, Harrison had systematically embezzled over $200,000 from the firm's escrow accounts. When Mitchell discovered the missing funds, Harrison had already transferred the money through a labyrinth of offshore accounts, claiming the business had simply suffered catastrophic investment losses. But it got so much worse. As I scrolled through the spreadsheets, I found files with my own name on them. Harrison had not stopped at stealing from his business partner. He had used my pristine credit score, my social security number, and the financial weight of my inherited home to open 3 different shell companies in the state of Delaware. He had taken out massive, fraudulent business loans using my name as the primary guarantor. If the federal authorities ever unraveled this mess, they would not just arrest Harrison. They would seize my house, empty my bank accounts, and possibly charge me as a co-conspirator. He had weaponized our marriage. He was using me as a human shield for his financial crimes. I spent the next 2 hours copying every single PDF, every spreadsheet, every bank routing number, and every email correspondence onto my flash drive. I copied the deeds to the property he had secretly purchased in Colorado under a fake name. I gathered a mountain of irrefutable, digital evidence. When the transfer was completely finished, I safely ejected the drive, shut the laptop down exactly as I found it, and crept back upstairs to bed. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the breathing of the criminal sleeping next to me. The sadness was completely gone. The anger had crystallized into something cold, sharp, and infinitely dangerous. Before I could blow Harrison's world to pieces, I had to ensure my own survival. If I confronted him or went to the authorities immediately, the bank accounts could be frozen in a lengthy federal investigation, or worse, Harrison could panic and drain our joint accounts before the police could stop him. On Tuesday morning, I called the hospital and told my supervisor I had a severe migraine and needed to take a rare personal sick day. I waited until Harrison was locked in his basement for his morning meetings, then I drove straight to the massive downtown branch of my primary bank. I sat in the office of a senior wealth management advisor, a stern-looking woman in a sharp gray suit. My hands were sweating, but my voice remained completely steady. I need to sever all joint access to my primary savings accounts, immediately, I told her, sliding my identification across the polished oak desk. And I need to transfer the entirety of my grandmother's inheritance, which is currently sitting in a shared high-yield account, into a standalone, irrevocable trust fund with myself as the sole beneficiary and trustee. The advisor frowned, typing rapidly on her keyboard. Mrs. Morrison, transferring that volume of capital, over $300,000, requires a significant amount of paperwork. Furthermore, your husband's name is on the secondary access list for the high-yield account. If I execute this transfer, the system will automatically generate a mobile alert and an email notification to all registered parties. Panic flared in my chest, hot and sharp. If Harrison got a text message saying $300,000 had vanished from his grasp, he would know I was onto him. He would run. He would destroy evidence. You have to disable the notifications first, I pleaded, leaning forward. Please. I am a nurse at Presbyterian. My husband is currently under investigation for severe financial fraud. If he receives an alert about this transfer today, he will flee the state, and I will lose everything my grandmother worked her entire life to give me. I have the sole legal authority over the origin of these funds. Disable his alerts, remove his access, and move the money. Now. I stared at her, channeling every ounce of authority I used when ordering life-saving medications in the trauma ward. She looked into my eyes, saw the absolute desperation mixed with unyielding resolve, and nodded slowly. For the next 45 minutes, I sat in agonizing silence as she navigated the complex banking software. I kept my phone clutched in my hand, staring at the blank screen, terrified that it would light up with a furious phone call from Harrison. The silence in the office was deafening. Every click of her mouse felt like a gunshot. All right, the advisor finally said, hitting the enter key one last time. The notifications have been suppressed. The joint access is revoked. The entirety of the inheritance has been successfully wired into your new, isolated trust account. He cannot touch a single penny. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for an entire week. The safety net was secure. My grandmother's legacy was safe. I thanked the advisor profusely and walked out of the bank into the bright, cold winter air. I was officially ready to play offense. I sat in the driver's seat of my car, pulled out my phone, and searched for the name Mitchell Lynn. It took me less than 5 minutes to find the phone number for his new, independent accounting office. I dialed the number, and when the receptionist answered, I did not ask for an appointment. Put Mitchell Lynn on the phone, I said sharply. Tell him Clara Morrison is calling, and I have the $200,000 his former partner stole from him. Mitchell Lynn agreed to meet me exactly 1 hour later at a run-down, 24-hour diner on the outskirts of the city, far away from my neighborhood. When I walked through the glass doors, the smell of old grease and burnt coffee hit me instantly. I spotted him sitting alone in a back booth. Mitchell looked terrible. He was perhaps 40 years old, but the stress of the last few months had aged him a decade. He had dark, heavy bags under his eyes, his suit jacket was wrinkled, and he looked like a man who had not slept a full night since the summer. He watched me approach with a mixture of deep suspicion and desperate hope. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, not standing up, his voice gravelly and guarded. "Or should I assume this is a trick? Did Harrison send you here to offer me a settlement?" "Call me Clara," I said, sliding into the vinyl booth across from him. "And my husband has absolutely no idea I am here. In fact, my husband thinks I am a naive, technologically illiterate nurse who is currently working a 12-hour shift at the hospital." I reached into my large tote bag, pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope containing printouts of the most damning evidence from my flash drive, and dropped it onto the sticky table with a loud thud. "Everything you have been searching for is in that envelope," I said calmly. "The routing numbers for the offshore accounts. The details of the 3 Delaware shell companies. The property deed for the house in Colorado he bought with your money. Every single stolen cent is documented right there." Mitchell stared at the envelope as if it were an unexploded bomb. His hands trembled slightly as he reached out, pulled the flap open, and began scanning the top pages. I watched his eyes dart back and forth across the spreadsheets. His expression shifted rapidly from skepticism to shock and finally to a deep, burning rage. "This is incredible," Mitchell whispered, his voice shaking. "I hired a private investigator who cost me $10,000, and she has given me absolutely nothing for 2 months. How did you get this?" "I am his wife. I have access to his house," I replied coldly. "Speaking of your private investigator, Valerie has not been giving you updates because she is too busy sleeping with my husband in my guest bedroom." Mitchell's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. What? Valerie is having an affair with Harrison. Yes. And they are planning to use your stolen money, along with my stolen inheritance, to run away to Colorado together, I explained, leaning back against the vinyl seat. She completely betrayed you, Mitchell. She fell for his lies. But fortunately for you, Harrison made the mistake of underestimating me. He thought I would never check the security cameras I secretly installed. He thought I would never crack his computer. Mitchell ran his hands over his face, letting out a harsh, bitter laugh. I cannot believe this. The audacity of that man. He ruins my business, steals my money, and then seduces the person I hired to catch him. I am calling the police right now. I am taking this directly to the authorities. He reached for his phone, but I shot my hand across the table, grabbing his wrist firmly. No, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You do not call the local police. Local police will turn this into a slow, messy domestic dispute. Harrison is a master manipulator. Given enough time and warning, he will find a way to destroy the digital evidence and wire the money to an untraceable crypto wallet before a detective even knocks on his door. Mitchell stared at me, his wrist still locked in my grip. Then what do you suggest, Clara? We have all the proof. We do not go to the local police, I repeated, releasing his arm. We go straight to the top. We go to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Wire fraud, money laundering, and interstate theft are federal crimes. But more importantly, Mitchell, I do not just want him arrested. I want him absolutely humiliated. I want to shatter his entire reality in a single, devastating moment. Mitchell leaned back, studying my face carefully. The exhaustion in his eyes was slowly being replaced by a sharp, calculating gleam. He was beginning to realize that the sweet, innocent nurse he thought he was meeting was actually the most dangerous person in the room. I have a contact, Mitchell said slowly. A woman named Special Agent Roxanne. She works in the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI. I tried to bring my case to her 3 months ago, but she told me I did not have enough concrete evidence to warrant a full federal raid. She said it was my word against his creative accounting. Call her, I commanded, tapping my fingernail against the thick manila envelope. Tell her you now have the laptop files, the routing numbers, and a cooperating witness who lives in the house. Tell her we can hand her a massive federal conviction wrapped in a neat little bow. Mitchell pulled out his phone and made the call. He walked out to the diner parking lot to speak privately. When he returned 15 minutes later, he looked like a new man. The heavy burden of defeat was entirely gone from his shoulders. Agent Roxanne is in, Mitchell said, sitting back down with a grim smile. She is sending a digital forensics team to secure the files on your flash drive this afternoon. If the evidence matches what we claim, she can fast-track a federal arrest warrant for Harrison by tomorrow evening. But she wants to know how we want to play this. Tomorrow is Thursday, I said, my mind working with the clinical precision of a surgeon planning a complex operation. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Donovan is out of town and Valerie comes over to my house at exactly 10:45 in the morning. They spend an hour drinking coffee and then they go upstairs. I outline the plan to Mitchell in precise, meticulous detail. I would pretend to go to work on Thursday morning. Mitchell would park his car 2 streets over and sneak into my house through the back door, hiding in the kitchen. I would be waiting. We would confront them together, right in the middle of their perfect, stolen afternoon. And the FBI? Mitchell asked. Do we have Agent Roxanne kick the door down while they are upstairs? No, I smiled, and it was the coldest smile I have ever worn. If the FBI arrests him in the morning, Valerie will just cry, Harrison will act tough, and they will claim it is a misunderstanding. I want him to feel safe. I want him to think he has survived the confrontation. I want him to look his absolute worst fears right in the eye. I explained the final phase of the trap. Harrison was incredibly arrogant, but his one true weakness was his parents. Warren and Edith were incredibly strict, highly respected, deeply religious people who had raised Harrison to be a pillar of moral integrity. Their approval meant absolutely everything to him. I am going to invite his parents over for a special dinner tomorrow night at 6 o'clock, I told Mitchell. I am going to tell them we have a massive surprise to share about our future. They will arrive exactly on time. And I want Agent Roxanne and her federal team to pull into my driveway at exactly the same moment. Mitchell stared at me for a long time. The diner was noisy, dishes clattering in the background, but between us, there was only a heavy, reverent silence. "You are terrifying, Clara," he finally whispered, shaking his head in absolute awe. "I would rather face a team of corporate lawyers than have you as an enemy." "My husband made a fatal mistake," I replied, standing up from the booth and grabbing my purse. "He thought, because I heal people for a living, I do not know how to cause pain. Tomorrow, we show him exactly how wrong he is." Thursday morning arrived with cold, clear skies. I woke up, put on my nursing scrubs, and went through my normal morning routine. I kissed Harrison on the cheek, told him I loved him, and drove away. I executed the same maneuver I had done before, parking blocks away, sneaking through the back alleys, and letting myself in through the side door. Mitchell Lynn was already waiting for me in the dark laundry room. We did not speak. We just nodded at each other. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a scalpel. We crept into the kitchen and hid behind the large pantry doors. At exactly 10:45, the front door unlocked. Valerie walked in, humming a cheerful pop song. I heard Harrison come up from the basement. The familiar, sickening sounds of their romantic greetings echoed through the hallway. They made a pot of coffee. I listened to the ceramic clink of the mugs being pulled from the cabinet. 20 minutes later, they walked upstairs, their voices fading behind the heavy wooden door of the guest bedroom. I looked at Mitchell. I held up my hand, raising 3 fingers. Then 2. Then 1. I pushed the pantry door open. I walked over to the coffee maker and poured myself a fresh cup of dark roast coffee. I specifically chose the delicate, pale blue ceramic mug with the tiny pink roses. I held it in my hand, feeling its warmth, and walked slowly up the main staircase. Mitchell followed 3 steps behind me, entirely silent. I reached the guest bedroom. The door was completely shut. I did not knock. I simply reached out, turned the brass knob, and pushed the door wide open. Harrison and Valerie were sitting up in the bed, the blankets pulled up to their waists. They were laughing about something, their faces close together. When they heard the door hit the wall, they both snapped their heads toward me. The silence that followed was absolute, terrifying, and beautifully profound. I stood in the doorway, wearing my hospital scrubs, sipping casually from the blue floral mug. "Good morning, you two," I said, my voice as cheerful and bright as a sunny Sunday morning. "I hope I am not interrupting anything important. I just realized I forgot my stethoscope, and I figured I would bring you guys some fresh coffee." Harrison's face drained of every single drop of blood. He went from a healthy, tanned complexion to a sickly, grayish-white in a matter of 2 seconds. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. Valerie screamed, a short, sharp gasp of pure terror, and pulled the blanket tightly up to her chin. "Clara," Harrison finally choked out, his voice cracking violently. "Clara, what are you doing here? You are supposed to be at the hospital. I can explain this. This is not what it looks like." "Oh, Harrison," I sighed, taking another sip of coffee. "It is exactly what it looks like. You were sleeping with the neighbor in my house, plotting to steal my grandmother's inheritance, and planning to run away to Colorado. But honestly, the infidelity is the least interesting part of my day." I stepped aside, clearing the doorway. "I brought a friend with me. I believe you two already know each other." Mitchell Lynn stepped into the frame of the door. He was wearing a sharp, dark suit, looking down at them with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Hello, Harrison," Mitchell said, his voice cold and hard. "Hello, Valerie. Interesting way to conduct a financial investigation, wouldn't you say?" Valerie burst into hysterical tears instantly. Mitchell, please. I am so sorry. I was going to tell you, but he manipulated me. He lied to me." Harrison scrambled backwards against the headboard, his eyes darting frantically between me and Mitchell. The arrogant, untouchable accountant was completely gone, replaced by a terrified, cornered animal. You cannot prove anything. Harrison yelled, pointing a shaking finger at Mitchell. You have no documents. You have no evidence. It is your word against mine, Mitchell. I smiled, holding up my phone. Actually, Harrison, he has everything. I broke into your encrypted laptop on Monday night. I gave Mitchell every spreadsheet, every offshore routing number, and the deed to the Colorado house. And yesterday afternoon, Mitchell gave all of it to a special agent in the Federal Financial Crimes Division. The fight completely left Harrison's body. He slumped against the pillows, his mouth hanging open in absolute defeat. The FBI has everything, I whispered, leaning in slightly. And they are coming for you. You have exactly until 6 o'clock tonight to pack a bag and prepare your excuses. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of pathetic chaos. Valerie threw her clothes on, grabbed her purse, and sprinted out of my house, weeping uncontrollably as she ran across the lawn to her own empty home. Mitchell left shortly after, telling Harrison he would see him in federal court. Harrison spent hours pacing the living room, begging, crying, and pleading for mercy. He promised he would give the money back. He promised he would go to therapy. He tried to gaslight me, claiming the pressure of his job had driven him insane. I simply sat on the sofa, drinking a glass of water, watching him completely unravel. I did not yell. I did not cry. I just watched. At 5:30 in the evening, Harrison dragged a large suitcase down the stairs. I am leaving, he said, his voice completely broken. I am going to drive out of state. I need to hire a lawyer. Clara, please, do not tell my parents about this. I will give you the house. I will give you a clean divorce. Just please, do not call my mother. I looked at the grandfather clock in the hallway. It was 5:45. I did not call your mother, I said truthfully, standing up and smoothing down my scrubs. I invited her. In fact, they should be here any minute. Harrison froze, his eyes widening in pure horror. What? No, Clara, you didn't. You wouldn't. At exactly 5:58, a silver sedan pulled into our driveway. Harrison's parents, Warren and Edith, stepped out of the car. Edith was holding a large, freshly baked apple pie in a glass dish. They were smiling warmly, dressed in their Sunday best, expecting a wonderful family dinner to celebrate a surprise announcement. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. Warren, Edith, come on in, it is so wonderful to see you, I called out cheerfully. Hello, darling, Edith beamed, walking up the steps and handing me the warm pie. We are so excited. Harrison sounded so mysterious on the phone when he told us to save the date. Warren patted my shoulder, stepping into the foyer. Where is my boy? Working late again. Harrison was standing at the bottom of the stairs, clutching the handle of his suitcase, looking like a man standing on the gallows waiting for the floor to drop. Warren frowned, taking in his son's pale, sweating face and the large luggage. Son? What is going on? Warren asked, his voice thick with confusion. Are you going somewhere? Before Harrison could invent a lie, the sound of heavy tires crunching on gravel echoed through the quiet neighborhood. Two unmarked, black sport utility vehicles pulled aggressively into our driveway, blocking Warren's sedan completely. The doors flew open simultaneously. For individuals wearing dark windbreakers with the letters FBI printed in bold yellow across the back stepped out. They moved with absolute, terrifying purpose. They walked quickly up the front steps, their hands resting cautiously near their tactical belts. Edith gasped, dropping her purse onto the hardwood floor. A tall, sharp-featured woman with a badge clipped to her belt stepped into the foyer. She looked directly at Harrison. Harrison Morrison, she asked, her voice echoing with undeniable authority. Harrison slowly nodded, his entire body trembling. I am Special Agent Roxanne with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, she stated clearly, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from her belt. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, money laundering, and the interstate theft of over $200,000 in client funds. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut around his wrists was the loudest sound I have ever heard. Edith let out a piercing wail, covering her mouth with both hands, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. Warren stepped forward, his face red with outrage. "There is a mistake. My son is an accountant. He is an honest man. You cannot just barge in here." "Dad," Harrison whispered, looking at the floor, too ashamed to meet his father's eyes. "Dad, don't. It's true. I did it." Warren stopped dead in his tracks. The proud, strict father seemed to age 20 years in a single second. The absolute devastation in his eyes as he looked at his son was heartbreaking, but it was a necessary cruelty. The illusion was shattered. The agents turned Harrison around to lead him out the door. As he walked past me, flanked by federal officers, he looked at me one final time. There was no hatred in his eyes. There was only absolute, crushing defeat. He realized, far too late, that the quiet, exhausted nurse he thought he could easily manipulate was the one who had engineered his total destruction. As they drove him away, I looked out the window. Next door, Valerie was standing on her front porch, clutching a small duffel bag, sobbing hysterically as she watched the federal vehicles disappear down the street. Her husband was due home in 2 days, and she had nowhere left to hide. 6 months have passed since that explosive Thursday evening. The legal fallout was swift and absolute. Because I had gathered such overwhelming, irrefutable digital evidence, Harrison had no choice but to accept a brutal plea deal. He was sentenced to 5 to 7 years in a federal penitentiary. He lost his accounting license permanently, and what little legitimate assets he had left were seized to pay legal fees. Valerie's life imploded shortly after. When Donovan returned from Germany and discovered his wife was a paid informant who had an affair with a federal criminal, he filed for divorce immediately. Valerie avoided jail time by cooperating with the authorities to return the remaining funds, but she received 3 years of strict probation, a massive fine, and had to move back to a small town in Oregon to live in her sister's basement. Mitchell Lynn recovered the vast majority of his stolen money. He sent me a massive bouquet of white lilies and a handwritten note thanking me for saving his life and his business. As for me, I finalized my divorce in record time. Because I had the foresight to secure my grandmother's inheritance in an impenetrable trust, and because Harrison was convicted of federal financial crimes involving our joint assets, the judge awarded me full ownership of the colonial house and protected every penny of my savings. I still work at Charlotte Presbyterian. I still wear my scrubs, I still work long shifts, and I still pour everything I have into saving my patients. But I am not the same woman who found that blue mug on the counter. The naive, overly trusting wife is dead. In her place is a woman who knows exactly how to protect her sanctuary, her wealth, and her peace. The house is quiet now, but it is a comfortable, powerful silence. I drink my morning coffee out of a plain white mug, and I smile. When this story was posted online, the comments section immediately exploded into a fierce debate. User 1 commented, "Clara is an absolute legend. Securing the inheritance before dropping the bomb was a masterclass in strategy. You do not just get mad, you get everything. Taking him down financially was the ultimate karma." User 2 argued, inviting his parents over to witness the federal raid was incredibly brutal. Harrison is a monster and deserved the jail time, but making his elderly mother watch him get put in handcuffs might have been a step too far. The parents were innocent victims in all of this. User 3 replied, "Absolutely disagree. He was using Clara's credit to commit federal crimes. If she hadn't acted, the parents would have been watching her get arrested instead. He deserved to have his entire fake, perfect image shattered in front of the people he was trying to impress." User 4 added, "I almost feel bad for Valerie. She got played by Harrison too, even if she started out as a spy. She ruined her own marriage for a guy who was just using her as a pawn in a bigger game." The debate continues to rage on, which brings me to the final question. Am I wrong for orchestrating the timing so his parents had to watch the FBI put him in handcuffs? Some say I went too far by involving innocent family members in the crossfire, but I felt he needed his entire fake image shattered at once to prevent him from ever spinning the narrative. What would you have done? Thank you so much for watching until the very end. If you have not subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button for more unbelievable stories where betrayal meets absolute karma.